Hello and good morning, afternoon, or evening to you all. In French folklore, there's a story of a man nicknamed Bluebeard. As the legend goes, Bluebeard and his wife lived in a castle in the French countryside. One day, Bluebeard left for a business trip and left his wife Fatima alone at the castle. He gave her a set of keys that went to multiple doors or chests of sorts throughout the castle, but warned her not to use the last one, as it went to a secret closet in the basement. Of course, the first thing Fatima did when her husband departed was open the secret closet. And this comes from one adaptation of the story. Quote, "Having come to the closet door, she made a stop for some time, thinking about her husband's orders and considering what unhappiness might attend her if she was disobedient, but the temptation was so strong she could not overcome it. She then took the little key and opened the door, trembling. At first, she could not see anything plainly because the windows were shut. After a few moments, she began to notice that the floor was covered with clotted blood, on which lay the bodies of several dead women, ranged against the walls. They were all the wives whom Bluebeard had married and murdered, one after another. She thought she should have died from fear itself, and the key which she pulled out of the lock fell from her hand." End quote. The long story short, when Bluebeard returns, he noticed immediately that Fatima had been in the basement closet and threatened to add her body to the pile of wives. However, at the last moment, Fatima's brothers, who were coincidentally visiting from out of town, arrived just in time to save her life and kill their murderous brother-in-law, with a happy ending for everyone. Now, that isn't the exact story I will be sharing with you today, but sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Today, I bring you the Bluebeard Killer. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from The Sun, All That's Interesting, Murderpedia, and the rest I'll put down below. France, 1917. A wealthy and widowed 51-year-old by the name of Madame Buisson responds to an ad in the local paper, looking for a second chance at love. And soon, she was swept off of her feet all over again by a Mr. Guillet. Before long, this man convinced her to move with him across France to Gambay, a small region outside of Versailles, leaving her family, including her only son, behind. According to Murderpedia, 2 years after Buisson met this man, her son, who was living with her sister, passed away. Obviously, the family wanted to notify her, but was unable to locate her. Her sister remembered that Buisson had whispered her intention of running away to Gambay with a Monsieur Guillet. Oh, also please bear with me for all the strugglesome pronunciations. Her sister wrote to the mayor of Gambay, seeking help in locating either Buisson or this Mr. Guillet. The mayor replied that he knew of neither of them, but perhaps she could beat the family of Madame Colombe, who was also missing in Gambay. She'd vanished under seemingly similar circumstances. After the mayor, she also contacted local authorities in the area, but they really couldn't do anything. They didn't know these people, they hadn't heard of these people, and their families weren't even sure that their relatives were missing. They were just hard to find. Determined, Buisson's sister, Madame Lacoste, traveled to the area herself and began combing the streets, hoping to find her sister or the man she had left with. And in 1919, her search finally paid off. She spotted her sister's lover, I guess, coming out of a shop and tried to tail him, but fell behind in a crowd. So Lacoste went back to the shop he had just left to inquire. The shopkeeper knew him well enough, and it turns out that his name wasn't Guillet. In fact, it was Henry Landru, and he was living nearby with yet another mistress, not Buisson. Lacoste went back to the detectives with this new information, and they brought Landru in for questioning. Detectives, quote, returned to Gambay, where a thorough search was undertaken. The gardens were excavated looking for bones, but the only remains police found were that of 2 dogs. They searched his old villa at Vorniet and came up equally empty. All the police had to go on was a cryptic memorandum book where Henry had meticulously recorded his income and expenses. But within the copious notes were several names that had interested authorities. On one page was the entry, quote, A. Couchet, G. Couchet, Brazil, Crozatier, so on, with a whole slew of names. Buisson and Colombe were missing, and the authorities soon learned that the whereabouts of the Couchets were also in question. They suspected this was a list of victims, but again, they had no bodies. Henry Landru kept silent and refused to talk with the police. He was confident in this erroneous knowledge that he could not be convicted of murder without a body, but such a conviction was and is possible under French law. For 2 years, authorities investigated the disappearances of his victims, yet Henry never admitted anything, end quote. But slowly, and over time, these names made more and more sense. It wasn't random gibberish or a mailing list. They learned that each of the women in the ledger had met Henry through his marriage advertisements and had since disappeared. And then on top of that, police found he had purchased one-way flights from Paris to Gambay for each one of the women, while he had always purchased a round-trip ticket for himself. According to Murderpedia, his gardens in Gambay and Vorniet were dug up again and again and again. Authorities tried to link Henry to purchases of acids or other chemicals, to no avail. Finally, neighbors of the Gambay residents told authorities of this noxious fume that often emanated from the kitchen. The stove that Landru had installed shortly after his arrival in this home was inspected, and horrific evidence of murder was uncovered. In the ashes, police found small bones, undoubtedly human, as well as a burned but still recognizable fastener of the kind worn on the clothes of French women. Henry had disposed of his victims by burning their remains. How they were killed was still a mystery, but what had happened to Madame Colombe, Madame Buisson, and as well as 9 others was very, very clear. According to Crime Library, quote, he was a little man, shorter than most, with a bald head and thick brownish red beard. His eyebrows were thick and bushy and arched above his dark eyes, giving the impression that he was always astonished or surprised. By his physical appearance, Henry Landru was not the type of man that one would suspect of being able to romance women out of their life savings. But there was something special about this second-hand furniture dealer and auto mechanic that vulnerable women found irresistible. And for many of them, their willingness to believe the lies that he told would cost them more than their fortune. The price they paid for falling under the spell of his was their life. Born of parents of modest means in 1869 during the middle of France's Third Republic, Henry's childhood and early years were as nondescript as he was. His mother was a housewife, and his father was employed as a fireman in the furnaces of Paris's Vulcane Ironworks? Oh no, I'm really messing with my head now. Young Henry was considered a bright lad who attended Catholic school and was admitted as a sub-deacon in the religious order of St. Louis in Ille-Isle. His schooling ended, like many of the boys of that era, around his 17th year after he took courses in engineering at the prestigious School of Mechanics. Drafted by the military at age 18, Henry excelled in the armed forces, reaching the rank of sergeant by the time of his discharge 4 years later. Clearly, by his late teen years, Henry had realized that he was cleverer than most and was pretty good with the ladies. Then in 1891, his first lady, he seduced his cousin, Mademoiselle Remy, who became pregnant and bore him a daughter. I'd like to see where she's at now. 2 years later, Henry married Mademoiselle Remy, and while he was the quartermaster of the regiment at St. Quentin, upon their marriage, Henry left this military life and went into business as a clerk. His employer, however, was a bit shady and ended up absconding with all of the money Henry had given to him as a bond, leaving a strong and salty impression on Henry. Incensed with this blow that fate had dealt, Landru made a vow to get revenge throughout a life of crime. Despite his standing as a deacon and member of the choir of his church, Henry became a swindler in addition to legitimate business as a furniture dealer and garage owner. His targets were most often the middle-aged widows whom he would meet through the furniture business. Quote, used to following the direction of their husbands and faced with the prospect of long, lonely, poverty-stricken lives, these women would come to him to sell their possessions. Henry would prey on their fears, and in addition to taking their possessions, he would woo his victims and entice them to let him invest their meager pensions, which he would promptly steal. Exactly what happened to him. The scam worked well for some time until 1900, when he made his first appearance in a French courtroom as a criminal. He was sentenced to a 2-year prison term for fraud after he tried to withdraw funds from the Comptoir des Escomptes using a fake identity. Upon his arrest, Landru attempted, some say pretended to attempt, suicide in jail. After his release, he remained married to his cousin, and together they had a total of 4 children. For the next decade, Landru was in and out of prison 7 times, serving as much as 3 years in one stint. Sometime around 1908, he struck upon the scheme that would eventually bring him face to face with the guillotine. Quote, in 1914, the following advertisement, or advertisement, appeared in the Paris newspapers. Quote, widower with 2 children, aged 43 with a comfortable income, serious and moving in good society, desires to meet widow with a view to matrimony, end quote. For a French widow in a depressed economy of wartime France, such an advertisement must have seemed heaven sent, and Landru, who placed the ad, had no trouble meeting women, end quote. According to Crime Library, the first woman to meet this 20th century Bluebeard was Madame Couchet, a 39-year-old woman with a 16-year-old son, Andre. Couchet worked in a lingerie shop in Paris and was barely keeping her head above water when she made Henry's acquaintance. He told her his name was Monsieur Diard and that he was an engineer. Their relationship flourished over time, but was not without its ups and downs. Henry's scheme was almost revealed before it had a chance to flower after Couchet and Diard had a falling out. She begged her family and brother-in-law to accompany her to Diard's villa near Chantilly with the hopes of ironing out their differences. Landru was not in when they arrived, but the family felt enough at home to search the villa. Her brother-in-law found a chest filled with many letters from other women and informed Couchet that her lover was a fraud. However, deeply in love, she chose to disregard her family's advice to dump this impostor, and instead furnished a villa at Verniette, outside Paris, became estranged from her family, and Diard, Couchet, and her son moved into the villa. The last time Couchet and Andre were seen alive was in January of 1915. Shortly after the 3 moved into that villa, Landru opened a bank account with 5,000 francs, which he claimed was part of his inheritance from his father, but in all likelihood, the money had come from Couchet. His next victim was Madame Laborde Line, the widow of a hotelier. She had told friends that she was planning to marry a young, charming engineer from Brazil. But frustrated with the red tape, the pair decided to dispense with the ceremony and move in together. Afterward, a man that her former neighbors identified as Henry came back and collected her furniture, sending some to his villa and the rest to a storage unit. Laborde Line was last seen in July of 1915 when she arrived at the villa with her 2 dogs. Remember those dog bones they found? Madame Guillen, a 51-year-old widow whose full name was Marie, why did I put her full name in here? Angelique Desiree Pelletier, was last seen at the villa a month later. Also in 1915, a Madame Aon visited Vernier and disappeared. And this would happen again and again and again. Landru would feed on the loneliness of these women just to take everything from them. All in all, at least 10 women and 1 boy and 2 dogs had disappeared after meeting Henry, yet no police had ever suspected him of any misdeeds. It would take a pair of anxious and nervous families to bring Bluebeard at long last to justice. His trial would begin in November of 1921, with the entirety of France awaiting the outcome. For a month, he stood up there denying every bit of evidence presented against him. For example, take this quote. He was asked, "What of your relationship with Madame Guillen?" He replied, "I am a gallant man and will say nothing. I cannot think of revealing the nature of my relations with Madame Guillen without the lady's permission." End quote. His arrogance before the court clearly shifted the jury. His shoulder shrugs and quickness to answer with sarcasm only succeeded in proving that he was the kind of man who would deceive women like his victims. It took the jury just 2 hours, after nearly 25 days of testimony, to decide that Henry had killed 11 women. The penalty as such was death. Unlike today, where prisoners on death row will know far in advance when they'll be executed, France liked to keep it a surprise back then. It could happen any day. And just over 2 months after his trial ended, he would eat his last meal. In February of 1922, Landru was brought before the guillotine. Quote, he bade farewell to his attorneys and presented them with some artwork he had drawn while in prison. Had they looked inside the frame, his attorneys would have found a written confession from Henry admitting his crimes and how he disposed of the bodies. But this was not discovered until nearly 5 decades later. He declined to hear from a priest and rejected the traditional glass of brandy from his jailer. Henry indignantly refused to make a statement, saying that the very question was an insult. So he stood before the guillotine, which had been the preferred form of execution in France since its revolution a little over a century before. He knelt down, and within moments, the blade had fallen, and one of the coldest mass murderers of all time died without ever expressing remorse for his crimes. End quote. And that, my friends, is the story of Henry Landru, aka the Bluebeard Killer. As always, thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time and listening in today. I love hearing all your feedback and appreciate all of your suggestions. Stick around for a 48 hours bonus story today, and I'll see you later. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Snape, Severus Snape. Dumbledore! I came across the story last week before the 48-hour episode actually aired, and it slipped my mind completely. This article is just a brief recap if you don't care to watch an hour-long show, whatever, titled, Who is Robert Baker and Where Is He Now? Written by Jude Epson of The Sun. Robert Baker was indicted in August 2017 in the killing of famed hairstylist Fabio Cementelli. Robert pleaded no contest to the stabbing and is currently being held in a correctional facility in LA. Robert Baker made the news in 2017 after he was arrested for murder. He was indicted along with his lover, Monica Cementelli, the wife of the deceased. In July of 2023, Robert pleaded no contest to the stabbing death of the hairstylist at his Woodland Hills home. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. After Fabio was found stabbed to death in his California home on January 23, 2017, investigators initially assumed it was a robbery gone wrong. However, later evidence revealed it was allegedly a murder by the victim's wife Monica and her lover Robert. Robert's blood and DNA were reportedly retrieved at the crime scene, having cut his finger stabbing Fabio to death. Discussing Monica's alleged involvement in the murder, Robert made a statement in a CBS interview saying, quote, Monica did not know. She didn't know shit. If she did find out, I would have been in here, jail, a lot sooner, end quote. He added that Monica, who has already spent nearly 6 years in jail, did not conspire with him to kill her husband, end quote. A classic lovers quarrel triangle, whatchamacallit. I tell you this story now because in less than a month, Monica will stand trial. April 2nd, her trial is set to finally happen after nearly 7 years of delays, COVID, and fighting for a separate trial from Baker. It shall be very interesting to see unfold, innocent until proven guilty, and I would say she stands a pretty good chance, especially if Baker does testify, which he hasn't decided if he will do or not do yet. We'll see. But I did hear a rumor of secret letters sent in prison after the murder, still professing her love for him, the murderer. So, I don't know. Seems like it goes pretty deep. Alrighty. That is all I have for you guys today. If you hated the episode, please make sure to leave a comment describing, in depth, how I should change for you. Thanks again. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.